First Contact's price. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the towering crystalline structure of the Phalak High Council chamber, her heart steady despite the gravity of the moment. The fate of humanity's first potential interstellar alliance rested on what came next. The massive chamber, carved from living crystal, amplified every sound, including the whispers of the dozen Phalak counselors who towered 3 meters above her. To forge the bond of nations, the High Speaker's voice resonated through the chamber, their crystalline form shifting through shades of deep blue. One must endure the trial of understanding. All species who join the Galactic Concordat must participate. There can be no exceptions. Sarah nodded, her diplomatic training kicking in. I understand, High Speaker. What does this trial entail? The High Speaker's form pulsed with amber light. The trial connects minds through pain. To truly understand another species, one must share in their suffering. For millennia, this has been our way. Many species have failed. Some have died. Do you still wish to proceed? Sarah thought of Earth, of the billions counting on this alliance. The Phalak controlled crucial hyperspace routes and technology that humanity desperately needed. Without this alliance, humanity would remain isolated in their small corner of space, vulnerable to the threats that lurked in the void. I accept the trial, Sarah declared. The chamber erupted in crystalline chimes as the Phalak counselors communicated among themselves. Finally, the High Speaker approached, extending a crystalline appendage that sprouted dozens of needle-like protrusions. The trial begins. May your species prove worthy. The needles plunged into Sarah's flesh, and her world exploded into agony. It wasn't just physical pain. She could feel the collective consciousness of the Phalak pouring into her mind. Their alien thoughts crashed against her consciousness like waves of liquid fire. Through the haze of pain, Sarah began to understand. The Phalak existed in a constant state of what humans would consider agony. Their crystalline bodies were in perpetual growth and reformation, every moment a symphony of breaking and rebuilding. What humans considered torture, they experienced as existence itself. Hours passed. Other species had lasted minutes. The High Speaker watched in growing amazement as Sarah remained standing, tears streaming down her face, but her mind still actively engaging with the collective consciousness. How? The High Speaker finally asked, their crystalline form flickering with confusion. The pain should have rendered you unconscious. Sarah managed a weak smile, even as another wave of agony washed through her. Humans, we endure. It's what we do. But more importantly, I understand now. Your pain. It's not just suffering. It's how you grow, how you connect, how you live. The High Speaker's form shifted to a deep purple of reverence. In all our history, no species has ever reached this understanding. They feel the pain, but they do not comprehend its purpose. Because they try to escape it, Sarah gasped. Humans, we've learned to embrace pain, to learn from it, to grow through it. She straightened, despite her trembling muscles. Like you do. The needles withdrew, and Sarah collapsed to her knees. The chamber filled with a harmonic resonance as every Phalak counselor glowed with the deep purple of reverence. The trial is complete, the High Speaker announced. Humanity has not just endured, they have understood. The bond is accepted. As medical teams rushed to her aid, Sarah smiled through her pain. She had done it. Humanity had their alliance. But more than that, they had gained something far more valuable, true understanding of another species. Later, in the medical bay, a junior Phalak diplomat approached her. The High Council is curious. How did you maintain consciousness through such pain? Sarah chuckled, then winced as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. You know what humans call this level of pain. Tuesday. I've had worse paper cuts. She paused, seeing the diplomat's crystalline form flicker in confusion. That's a joke. Sort of. The truth is, pain is part of the human experience. We endure it, learn from it, sometimes even seek it out. Marathon runners, childbirth, tattoos. Pain shapes us, but it doesn't define us. The diplomat's form shifted to a color Sarah hadn't seen before. Your species is remarkable. No, Sarah corrected, thinking of all the humans who had endured unimaginable hardships throughout history. We're just human. This is what we do. We endure. We understand. We grow. And now, thanks to the trial, we can do it together. As news of the successful alliance spread throughout human space, few understood the true price paid for this first contact. But Sarah Chen knew that her pain had built a bridge between species, a bridge of understanding that would change both civilizations forever. Because sometimes, the greatest diplomatic achievements don't come through words or treaties, but through the simple, human act of enduring. The engine room incident. Chief Engineer Marcus Santos knew something was wrong the moment he heard the quantum drive's distinctive hum change pitch. The massive engine room of the ISS Horizon, humanity's first joint venture with the Phalak, shouldn't have been making that sound. The crystalline aliens who made up half the engineering crew were already backing away from the drive core, their bodies flickering with warning colors. Emergency shutdown protocol initiated, announced Cuttle, the Phalak engineering liaison. All personnel must evacuate immediately. Core temperature exceeding safe parameters. Marcus checked the readings and felt his blood run cold. The quantum drive wasn't just overheating, it was approaching critical failure. If it blew, it would take half the ship with it, along with the 2,000 crew members aboard. How long until critical? Marcus demanded, already moving toward the drive housing. 7 minutes. Cuttle's crystalline form pulsed with urgent reds and oranges. The containment field is failing. We must evacuate now. Marcus shook his head, doing rapid calculations. Evacuation takes 10 minutes minimum. We won't make it. He grabbed his toolkit. But I think I can stabilize it manually. Impossible. Cuttle's form shifted to a sharp violet of alarm. The radiation levels near the core are already lethal. Even with protective gear, you would have less than 2 minutes of exposure time. Then I better work fast. Marcus was already pulling on his radiation suit. Get everyone else out. I'll handle this. The Phalak engineer's crystalline form vibrated with distress. You cannot survive those radiation levels. Your organic tissue will begin breaking down immediately. Probably, Marcus agreed, checking the seals on his suit. But better one death than 2,000. Now go. As the evacuation alarm blared and the last engineers fled the chamber, Marcus approached the drive core. The heat was intense even through his suit, and his radiation detector was screaming warnings. The quantum drive's housing was a mess of twisted metal and failing containment fields, the result of an unexpected reaction between human and Phalak technology. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as he felt the first effects of radiation exposure. His skin tingled, then burned. Sweat poured down his face inside his helmet. The drive core pulsed with deadly energy mere inches from his hands. Santos. Captain Chen's voice crackled over his comm. The radiation will kill you. Get out of there. With all due respect, Captain, Marcus grunted, wrestling with a particularly stubborn coupling. I'm a bit busy saving our ship. He could taste copper in his mouth. The first sign of severe radiation poisoning. His time was running out. The quantum drive's pitch rose to a scream. 4 minutes until critical failure. Marcus's vision was starting to blur, but his hands remained steady. He'd spent 15 years working on quantum drives. He could do this in his sleep, which was good, because he was pretty sure he was starting to lose consciousness. Almost. Got it. His fingers found the emergency release valve. With the last of his strength, he twisted it counterclockwise. The drive's scream began to fade. Core temperature dropping. Cuttle's voice came through the comm, thick with disbelief. Containment field stabilizing. You did it. Marcus tried to respond, but his legs gave out. As darkness crept into his vision, he saw the emergency teams rushing in, led by a group of Phalak medical officers. Their crystalline forms pulsed with colors he'd never seen before. He woke up 3 days later in the medical bay. His body ached from radiation burns, and the doctors told him he'd need months of regenerative therapy. But he was alive. And more importantly, so was everyone else. Cthulhu visited him, the alien's crystalline form shifting through thoughtful blues. "We have studied the incident extensively," they said. "By all our calculations, what you did was impossible. The radiation levels should have killed you within seconds." Marcus shrugged, then winced at the movement. Sometimes impossible just means nobody's been stubborn enough to try it yet. "You knew you would likely die," Cthulhu observed, "yet you chose to act anyway. Why?" "Because it was my job," Marcus replied simply. "Those people trusted me to keep them safe. That's worth any price." Cthulhu was silent for a long moment. "The Valak have always believed we understood sacrifice through our constant pain. But perhaps we have more to learn from humans than we thought." News of the incident spread quickly through both human and Valak space. The story of the human engineer who endured lethal radiation to save his crew became a symbol of the potential of their alliance. But for Marcus, recovering in his hospital bed and already making plans to improve the drive's safety systems, it was just another day at work. Because that's what humans do. They solve problems. They protect their own. And sometimes, they accomplish the impossible simply because nobody told them they couldn't. Battle for Proxima. Lieutenant Maya Patel's fighter screamed through space, her teeth clenched as the G-forces threatened to knock her unconscious. The battle for Proxima Centauri had been raging for 6 hours, and her squadron was all that stood between a Drachnid assault fleet and the civilian evacuation ships. Valak cruiser Eternal Light is taking heavy damage, her eye combat system reported. Shield failure imminent. Estimated survival time: 3 minutes. Maya checked her fighter's status. Fuel at 12%. Primary weapons nearly depleted, structural integrity compromised. The smart move would be to retreat, to live to fight another day. But the Eternal Light carried over 3,000 refugees, both human and Valak. "Squadron, form up on me," she ordered, ignoring the burning in her muscles from hours of high maneuvers. "We're going to buy that cruiser sometime." "Lieutenant," her wingman's voice crackled through the comm, "we're running on fumes here. One good hit, and we're done." "Then don't get hit," Maya replied, plotting an attack vector that should have been impossible. "Remember your training. Humans have better force tolerance than any species in known space. Time to prove it." Her squadron fell into formation. 5 human pilots and fighters that were never meant to last this long in combat. The massive Drachnid warships loomed ahead, their organic hulls bristling with weapons. Maya took a deep breath, feeling the stimulants in her bloodstream fighting against the crushing G-forces. Attack pattern Delta 7. Push it to the limit. Their fighters dove into the heart of the Drachnid fleet, pulling maneuvers that would have killed any other species. 9 Gs, 10 Gs, 12 Gs. Maya's vision narrowed to a tunnel, her specialized flight suit working overtime to keep blood flowing to her brain. First target acquired, she managed through gritted teeth. Hit them where it hurts. Their remaining missiles streaked out, guided by Maya's targeting calculations. The Drachnid ships, massive and powerful, but relatively slow, couldn't track the human fighters moving at speeds their targeting systems had deemed impossible. The first warship's organic hull burst open, atmosphere venting into space. The second took critical damage to its propulsion system. But the Drachnids were adapting, their biological ships learning from each encounter. Incoming fire. Maya's eye warned. She yanked her fighter into a roll that pushed her body to its absolute limit. Her wingman wasn't as lucky. His fighter disappeared in a flash of light. "Lieutenant," the Eternal Light's Valak captain called over the command channel, their crystalline voice thick with concern. "Your life signs are reaching critical levels. You must withdraw." Maya ignored the warning, just as she ignored the pain in her chest and the gray edges of her vision. "Not yet. We need to clear you a path to the jump point." She pushed her fighter into another impossible turn, the G-forces threatening to tear both ship and pilot apart. Her remaining squadron members followed, their human bodies enduring stresses that would have killed any other species instantly. How? The Valak captain demanded as Maya's squadron carved through another Drachnid formation. Your bodies should have failed by now. Maya laughed, though it came out more as a grunt under the crushing G-forces. Captain, my great-grandmother ran ultramarathons. My grandfather was a deep-sea rescue diver. This is just another day at the office. The battle raged on. One by one, Maya's squadron members were picked off or forced to withdraw as their fighters failed around them. But they had achieved their goal. The Eternal Light was nearly at the jump point, its precious cargo of refugees still intact. Final Drachnid warship approaching, her AI reported. Intercept course plotted. Maya checked her status. Fuel at 3%, structural integrity critical, multiple systems failing. Her body wasn't doing much better. The sustained G-forces had burst blood vessels in her eyes, and she was pretty sure she had several stress fractures. Just one more, she muttered, plotting a course that her AI labeled as unsurvivable. Her fighter screamed through space one last time, pushing far beyond its design limits. Maya felt something pop in her shoulder as she pulled a turn that subjected her to forces that should have turned her to paste. The Drachnid ship never saw the final attack coming. Maya's remaining weapons found their mark, tearing through the organic hull at a crucial junction. The massive warship began to break apart, its biological systems failing catastrophically. Jump drive spooling up, the Eternal Light reported. Thank you, Lieutenant. Your actions today will not be forgotten. Maya's fighter, finally giving up after hours of abuse, began to break apart around her. Just doing my job, Captain. Give those refugees a good home. Emergency teleporters grabbed her just as her fighter exploded, depositing her broken but alive body in the Eternal Light's medical bay. As the massive ship jumped to safety, Maya finally allowed herself to lose consciousness. She woke up 3 days later to find herself being awarded the highest honors of both humanity and the Valak. The battle had become an instant legend. The day 5 human pilots held off an entire Drachnid fleet through sheer determination and unprecedented physical endurance. The Valak High Command had updated their tactical databases, noting that human pilots should be considered capable of maneuvers well beyond normal physical limitations. But Maya, still recovering in her hospital bed, knew the truth. It wasn't about physical limitations at all. It was about what you were willing to endure to protect others. And when it came to that, humans had no limits at all. The quarantine protocol. Dr. Aisha Rahman hadn't slept in 72 hours. The quarantine facility on New Horizon, humanity's first joint colony with the Valak, was overwhelmed. A mysterious virus was tearing through both human and crystalline populations, defying all known medical protocols. Another dozen cases in Section 7, her assistant reported, a young Valak whose crystalline form had dulled from exhaustion, and the isolation ward is at 200% capacity. Aisha nodded, studying the latest test results through burning eyes. The virus was unlike anything she'd seen before. It could affect both organic and crystalline life, adapting and evolving with frightening speed. Doctor, Station Administrator Chen called from the doorway, her face grave. The Concordat Council is recommending we implement Protocol Omega. Aisha's head snapped up. Protocol Omega meant sealing off the entire colony, leaving everyone inside to die to prevent the virus from spreading. Over 50,000 lives would be lost. No, she said firmly, turning back to her microscope. Give me more time. The Council has given us 24 hours, Chen replied softly. After that, they'll implement the protocol remotely. I'm sorry. As Chen left, Aisha's Valak assistant shifted nervously. Doctor, perhaps we should evacuate essential personnel while we can. I'm not going anywhere, Aisha replied, adjusting her microscope. And neither is anyone else if I can help it. The hours ticked by in a blur of test results, failed treatments, and the constant sound of emergency alarms. Aisha moved from patient to patient, human and Valak alike, gathering data and testing theories. Her own exposure risk was enormous. The protective suits could only do so much against a virus this aggressive. Several of her medical staff had already fallen ill, but Aisha kept working, running on caffeine and sheer determination. 18 hours until Protocol Omega. Her assistant reminded her, "Doctor, you need rest. Your vital signs are concerning." Aisha waved off the concern, though her hands were shaking from exhaustion. "Can't rest. Think I'm onto something." She pointed to her latest test results. "Look at how the virus behaves differently in human and Valak tissue. It's not just adapting. It's trying to bridge the gap between our physiologies." She worked frantically, testing her theory. The virus wasn't just destroying, it was attempting to create something new, a hybrid form that could exist in both organic and crystalline hosts. If she could understand its mechanism. "Doctor." Her assistant's cry snapped her from her focus. She'd been about to collapse, catching herself on the edge of her workstation. "I'm fine," she insisted, though the room was spinning. "Just need to." The world went black. When she came to, she was lying in one of the few remaining beds, an IV in her arm. "How long?" she demanded, trying to sit up. 4 hours, her assistant replied. "Protocol Omega begins in 14 hours. Aisha pulled out her IV, ignoring the protests of her staff. "Help me to the lab. I know how to stop it." The next 10 hours were a desperate race against time. Aisha's theory was correct. The virus wasn't trying to kill, but to transform. By introducing a modified version of itself, they could guide that transformation in a safe direction. "It's working," she breathed, watching through her microscope as the virus in her test samples began to change. "Quick, start synthesizing the treatment. We need enough for the whole colony." With just 2 hours until Protocol Omega, they began administering the treatment. The results were immediate. Both human and Valak patients began to stabilize. "Remarkable," the Valak High Medical Officer observed, examining the data. "You discovered this while severely sleep-deprived and ill yourself." Aisha, finally allowing herself to rest, managed a tired smile. Sometimes the best insights come when you're too exhausted to remember what's supposed to be impossible. The quarantine was lifted 3 days later. Not a single life was lost after the treatment began. The Concordat Council was amazed, not just by the medical breakthrough, but by the dedication that led to it. "You risked your own life," the High Medical Officer noted during the commendation ceremony. "Worked far beyond normal human limits." Why? Aisha thought of her patients, human and Valak, all trusting her with their lives. Because that's what doctors do. We don't give up on people, no matter what. The virus incident led to a revolution in medical science, as researchers studied how it had bridged the gap between organic and crystalline life. But for Aisha, the real breakthrough was simpler, proof that human determination could overcome any obstacle, even death itself. Because when lives were on the line, humans didn't know how to quit. They just kept going, long past the point where anyone else would have given up. And sometimes, that made all the difference. The final test. The message reached Earth on a quiet Tuesday morning. An ancient alien artifact had been discovered at the edge of known space. The Concordat Council called for representatives from all species to investigate. What they found would test not just human endurance, but the very nature of what made humanity unique. Commander Elena Santos stood in the massive chamber aboard the artifact, surrounded by representatives from 12 different species. The chamber's walls pulsed with an otherworldly light, displaying images of countless civilizations that had risen and fallen across the galaxy. "The trial begins," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Each species must face their greatest challenge. Only those who pass may receive the knowledge of those who came before." One by one, the representatives were subjected to tests that targeted their species' specific strengths. The Valak faced a test of crystalline reformation. The insectoid Zarkax were challenged with complex hive mind calculations. Each test was perfectly tailored to push each species to their absolute limit. Finally, it was humanity's turn. Human, the voice addressed Alina. Your species has demonstrated remarkable physical resilience. Shall we test your pain threshold, your endurance, your ability to survive extreme conditions? Alina thought of Ambassador Chen's diplomatic trial, of Engineer Santos's sacrifice in the engine room, of Lieutenant Patel's impossible space battle, of Dr. Raman's tireless work during the pandemic. No, she replied firmly. That's not what makes us special. The chamber fell silent. Even the other species representatives turned to stare at her. Explain, the voice commanded. Pain tolerance, physical endurance. They're just symptoms, Alina said. Our true strength isn't in what we can endure, but why we endure it. Test that. The chamber pulsed with new light. Very well. The floor beneath them began to shake. The chamber's walls became transparent, revealing a massive space station on the verge of collapse. Thousands of life forms from various species were trapped inside. The station will fail in 1 hour, the voice announced. The emergency teleporters can save everyone, but they require manual operation. The radiation in the control room is lethal. No protection is possible. Whoever stays to operate the teleporters will die. Alina looked around the chamber. The other representatives were backing away, their species' survival instincts taking over. Additionally, the voice continued, all species representatives present must agree on who will sacrifice themselves, or all will be lost. You have 10 minutes to decide. The chamber erupted in argument. The Valak insisted their crystalline forms made them most suitable. The Zarkax argued their hive mind could distribute the trauma of death. Each species presented logical arguments for why they should be the ones to sacrifice themselves. Alina listened to them all, then stepped forward. I'll do it. That is illogical. The Zarkax representative protested. Other species are better suited. This isn't about being best suited, Alina interrupted. It's about being willing. About choosing to endure not because we can, but because we must. She turned to address them all. Humans don't endure pain because we're stronger. We don't face death because we're braver. We do it because sometimes that's what's needed. Because someone has to. Because if we can save others by bearing the burden ourselves, that's not even a choice. It's just what humans do. The chamber fell silent again. One by one, the other representatives stepped back, giving their consent. You understand, the voice said softly, that this is real, that you will die. Alina smiled. Of course it's real. It wouldn't be a proper test otherwise. She squared her shoulders. I'm ready. The chamber dissolved around them. They stood in the same room, but the impending disaster was gone. The voice spoke again, but now it held a note of wonder. In all our millennia of testing species, none have understood. Physical endurance, pain tolerance, survival instinct. These are mere adaptations. But the willing sacrifice of self for others, the choice to endure not because you must, but because you choose to, this is evolution of the soul. The artifact's walls blazed with light, revealing technologies and knowledge beyond imagination. But more importantly, they revealed a truth about humanity that even humans hadn't fully understood. Your species' greatest strength, the voice declared, is not that you can endure anything. It is that you will endure anything for others. This is what makes you unique among all the species we have tested. This is what makes you ready. As the assembled representatives absorbed this revelation, Alina thought about all the humans who had demonstrated this truth. The diplomat who endured pain to forge understanding. The engineer who accepted death to save his crew. The pilot who pushed beyond limits to protect refugees. The doctor who refused to rest while lives hung in the balance. They hadn't done these things because humans were special. They had done them because humans cared. And in the end, that made all the difference. The knowledge of the ancients was shared with all species present that day. But the greatest lesson wasn't found in their advanced technology or scientific understanding. It was in the simple truth that humanity had unknowingly demonstrated throughout its history. True strength isn't in what you can endure, it's in why you choose to endure it. And that was something worth passing on to the next generation of species who would reach for the stars.